See everybody. All right. All right. Happy Monday, everyone. Hopefully this is a good start to everyone's week. What is hopefully a non-stressful week of short hours for everyone, right? Fingers crossed. All right. Got a lot of people still coming in, so we're gonna continue to have let people trickle in for another minute or two, and then we'll kind of get started so that y'all have most of the time to ask questions and get feedback from our presenters, and you can stop listening to me, most importantly. Wonderful. All right, Laura, I'm gonna stop admitting people and start doing some of the presentation work, if that's okay.
Yep.
Amber Efrata joined. Isn't that so nice? All right, old interns. All right. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Pi Day 2022. So excited to see everyone here and so appreciative of everyone being willing to spend your Monday morning with us. It's an absolute pleasure. We have a busy day today and a tight timeline, so we're just gonna go ahead and get started. I know people are trickling in. I'm so excited to be hosting everyone this morning, and I'm hoping that it's really going to be well worth it today. We've got an excellent group of presenters, an even better set of panelists, and a great audience as well, right? We have small and large nonprofits, we have grant makers, we have evaluators from all walks of life. And so I'm hoping we can provide some great thought, reflection, and discussion across groups today, and hopefully plant seeds for future changes in practice. Right? The whole goal of Pi as an organization in this day-to-day is to start reflecting on your own practices so that we can do better service for others, right? So for those who don't know me, my name is Jay Wade, and I have the privilege of being the executive director of Planning, Implementation, and Evaluation org, or Pi org. And I'll be co-hosting today with my right-hand woman, Dr. Amber Mason. Can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dr. Wade. It's just a pleasure to be here on this wonderful Pi Day. As a former math teacher, you know, Pi Day is always a wonderful celebration. So being able to be a part of an organization like Pi who celebrates this day is still just as fun. But I am Amber Mason, Director of Evaluation here at Pi org, and I am pleased to be with you all today.
So for those who don't know Pi, who are joining out of without having met us beforehand, so Pi is a Chicago-based national provider of evaluation, strategic planning, and capacity building services. And our mission is to partner with any mission-driven organization to evaluate impact, promote learning, and facilitate equitable change. So I always say, if you're serving others, then we want to serve you. Right. And so we do external evaluation work, both formative and summative, so we can collect and use data to understand impact on communities and populations we're serving. Strategic planning, so that we can start with the end in mind and think about organizational efficiencies and growth. And then capacity building and coaching to create a culture of learning and to make sure that data is implemented, that strategic plans are implemented, and that we're promoting everyone's ability to do the good work that we need to get done, right? So that's briefly about us, but today is mostly about our presenters. So briefly, here's our agenda for today.
So just to give us an overview, we're going to take you guys through a little bit of a welcome, just giving some purpose and context as to why we chose this year's theme. And then I am so excited to, we have today for our guest, uh, Up Metrics, Chicago Foundation for Women, and a wonderful collective impact panel with We Go Together for Kids, North Lawndale Reads, Open Books representative, and United Way Metro Chicago. At the end, we'll have some final thoughts, and the most exciting part of the day, aside from our presenters, is we will be raffling off a pie in honor of Pi Day. But just to thank you guys for being part of this, our annual event. And not to mention, we also have an exit survey at the end, so you could just give us some of your feedback and let us know whether you enjoyed Pi Day or if you have any feedback for us.
Yep.
Just some housekeeping. Of course, we would love to see your beautiful faces this Monday morning. But if you can, just make sure you stay muted as we go along so we don't have a ton of noise in the background. FYI, cute kids and animals are always welcome to be joined in the picture. So don't feel you need to just be away if you have some things going on in the background. We totally understand. Presentations will be recorded. So the presentation will be emailed out to everyone who RSVP'd. So just know you can go back to these presentations when you're thinking about Pi Day late at night. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will be manning the chat just to make sure that we can answer the questions as they come along. And any questions that aren't answered by the end, we definitely will follow up as needed. 5 minutes will be given for questions at the end of each presentation if time allows. We know sometimes time can get away from us, but we want to make sure that each presenter has the time allotted for their presentations. And again, Pi will monitor for the sake of efficiency and ask questions on behalf because we have a lot of guests today. We're so excited. And of course, please, please, please stay until the end for the pie raffle. We can't wait to announce the winners, and we will present the winners at the end along with the exit survey.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Amber. So real quick, we just want to set a purpose here for the day. Why was this theme telling the story, promoting your work, and capturing your impact? And so we wanted to just kind of level set a little bit before we get into our presentations today. So at Pi, we begin every single partnership with a simple yet complex question. What is the story you want to tell about the work you're doing? Right? And I'd like everyone to take a moment and think about your own work, your own organizations, and your own communities. What is the story that you want to tell about what you're doing? And if you could, just take a moment to reflect and maybe put it in the chat. So I'll give everyone a minute to just kind of think and reflect. Oop. What is the story you want to tell? And so as you're thinking about the story that you want to tell, reflect and think, how are you telling that story? Are you telling that story? And can people hear you telling that story? And what do you all need to do as an organization, as a collective impact initiative, or a program to better support not only telling your story, but amplifying your story to the people who need to hear it? And that's the goal of today's Pi Day theme, telling your story, promoting your work, and capturing your impact. There are many ways to tell stories, and we're just going to touch on a few of them here today. However, we want everyone to be able to tell the story of the work they're doing, the people they're in service to. And we hope today we can spur some reflection in the audience, because all of us are working hard in the social sector to support people and communities. And our goal is to provide a few helpful ways that we can think about storytelling with data. But of course, at Pi, we're nerds at heart. And so we definitely want to talk about the research, right? There's a research base for why storytelling is important, right? Telling a good story in nonprofits helps nonprofits distinguish themselves and is a powerful tool for reaching external audiences. However, most nonprofits struggle to collect and use data to tell stories about impact. And not only that, but this is an issue of equity. BIPOC-led and serving nonprofits routinely report greater struggles with the capacity to collect data for learning, impact, marketing, and fundraising. So this is why storytelling is important. The next question is, how do we tell a good story? And Dr. Amber Mason will walk us through some examples here.
Thanks, Jay. Now here on the screen, this is just a quote that resonated with us, but data are just summaries of thousands of stories. Tell a few of those stories to help make the data meaningful. So within the social sector, data is integral to storytelling. And often we think of data as quantitative and just around the numbers. However, we often forget that behind those numbers are people, lives, communities, and experiences. So from a nonprofit and social sector perspective, the goal for telling a good story about your organization or program or the people served then is the ability to tie the numbers into a compelling narrative about those you are in service to. Of course, highlighting their lived experiences and the impact your organization has on them in a clear and compelling way. So I just want to kind of give a real life example of, an experience that we had with an organization. So this is a clear example that shows how the social sector can, I'll say, ramp up its data by storytelling. So this is based on a real example of a school that, a real example of a school which has invested in a program where they were trying to demonstrate to their school board to continue this particular program. And they knew for the most part that the program was strong and its effect on student trajectories and based on, a lot of quantitative elements and grades and test scores, things like that. However, they weren't able to create a cohesive narrative around it and tell a compelling story about why this program is needed and why it should continue. So as we go throughout and showing this data, just so you know, names, titles, things like that have been changed. We aren't displaying this is a real data story, but we have not, it's anonymous for this sake. But this is an example of how they were presenting their data to their board and the community members. And the data they collected was clear and precise, but it was presented in tables annually without change over time or any type of analysis or graphics or any type of storytelling. So as you know, presenting this to a board can be a bit boring, can be a bit lackluster and not quite strengthening the story that needs to be told about this great program within the district. So Pi was able to step in and work with the school district to help turn things into a larger historical analysis that popped and grabbed attention in some very clear ways. So the graphic here itself, and this is just a small snippet of some things that we did with them, but the graphic here told a story. Clearly, this program had a dramatic impact on students. It raised GPAs, supported higher attendance, and helped students pass their classes at higher rates. And these data points were important. However, it still lacked the punch of that personal story, the story behind the students, the staff, the families that were impacted by this work. So we also interviewed staff and students to gain insight into their lived experience behind the numbers. So here we have, again, names have been changed. We definitely aren't showcasing any real people. However, this is real data from this program. So as you see here, it was articulated that this program changes lives. That is strong for someone to not just say, oh, it was a great program, but this program changes lives. It may seem just like another high school program, but it's a transformative process. It changes the course of their future. So imagine the board having this type of context behind those numbers. And again, we had interviews with students as well to support what was already known, what was already seen, to tell an even more compelling story. So this leads us to the question, what is the story of the students and whose lives and futures are changed through this program, which was greatly articulated through the quotes that we were able to support the data with. So in all of this, as you see, our theme of storytelling, the importance of data storytelling, our goals for today with our theme, telling your story, promoting your work, and capturing impact. We know there are many ways to tell stories about your work, and we offer only a few ideas today. However, we hope to spur reflection to all in this audience today and all of us who are working hard in the social sector to support the people and communities we are in service to. Our goal is to provide a few helpful ways that mission-driven organizations can think about storytelling from a data and evaluation perspective, and spur some thinking about better ways to use evaluation to support storytelling. So, of course, goals today highlight our approaches in this mission-driven storytelling, data and research, understand our assets and the issues around storytelling in a collective impact context, and then spur reflection and discussion with hope that the changes in data collection and storytelling can begin within your organizations. Now, on to the good part. We've done enough talking. First up, we have Vinay Mullick with UpMetrics, who will discuss the technical sides of storytelling and highlight how evaluation data and a strong database design can facilitate better nonprofit storytelling. So pleased to have you, Vinay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Jay. Great to be here. And I think Jay said it. I don't think I've been on a Zoom with so many folks probably for the last 20 months. So this is this is good to see everybody, albeit virtual, and hopefully at some point we're back together. Amber, I appreciate you being a former math teacher. I am one as well. So this is a special day, right? A special day for us math nerds. So definitely appreciate you all having me, and excited to really double down on what Amber and Jay mentioned around the idea of storytelling. And as I mentioned, I'm at UpMetrics, and we work with lots of organizations around their data, whether it's programmatic, whether it's community level data, all helping them to drive stories of impact. As Jay and Amber mentioned, we are more on the kind of the micro level of making it happen. And before we get into that, I just want to share a little bit about me, so you know my lens and where some of the items that I talk about, where it kind of comes from. I'm actually an engineer by degree. I was a manufacturing engineer for Intel Corporation some 20 years ago. And then I kind of realized I wanted to be and get on a journey of more social justice and impact. Don't get me wrong, working at a great company like Intel was an awesome experience, but I think for me, I wanted to build equity in people and not so much a company. And that kind of took me on this journey of kind of shifting my career around education, entrepreneurship, and social justice. I was lucky enough to teach in the Chicago Public Schools for a handful of years, and then I was a school administrator in CPS. So for about 12 years, I worked in CPS. I was a math pre-engineering teacher, and then I was a school administrator for 9 years as a network of charter schools, prospective charter schools. And so in that journey, got a lot of exposure to see how data can be used to better storytell. I also learned a lot around how data, could be leveraged negatively to storytell as well. So I've kind of seen both sides of it. That kind of brought me to my work at UpMetrics. And along that way, my experience in youth development and the ability to see how we use metrics to better get my students the resources that we needed to deliver the interventions through after school or in-school programming was kind of what really motivated me to kind of jump and join the UpMetrics ship. And I know there's a lot of faces on here that we've worked with. I think one thing I like to pride myself on is connecting folks that are doing good work. And I think that's how Jay and I connected initially many moons ago. And if we get the opportunity to stay in touch, I'm a big fan around kind of connecting the dots and making sure, as Amber said, in social impact, we're all doing good work, and it's good to stay in touch and support each other. A little bit about UpMetrics. So, at the bottom, you'll see, our role is to empower organizations with the knowledge and the tools needed to accelerate their impact of their mission. We have a great team doing it. We work with lots of nonprofits and funders. I'm here in Chicago, but we are a national organization. There's about 30 of us, so we're not too big, we're not too small, but we have heavy presence on the West Coast and definitely on the East Coast, and then I'm here in the Chicagoland area. And then how do we do it? So we look at it in two different ways, right? Our model is a mix of tech and team. Yasmin, I saw you mention, the mixed methods approach in the chat. That's something we'll get to later. So I definitely appreciate you calling that out. But as we look at the team, we kind of up here, we have the social sector experts. We definitely consider Pi one of those partners in that work. So we're really excited about the partnership that we have with Pi and our ability to collaborate and do work together. We also have that support within our organization. A lot of folks with the profiles of many of you on this call are organizations that are working within our team as well. We have what's called our DECAL methodology. I'll get into that a little bit later. That's just define, collect, analyze, and leverage. And the big thing that we work with, many of all you know about, is our impact analytics platform. And basically, it's a software platform that allows you to use a mixed methods approach to telling your stories of impact, but doing it all around the platform that we provide. And then how do we work with philanthropy? We do a lot of work within philanthropy, and that obviously includes the grant makers, and that includes the foundations themselves. But we have what's called our cohort model, where we work with philanthropy to identify organizations and nonprofits, put them in a learning cohort. The idea of continuous improvement and learning through your data is up front and first in that setup. And we do a lot of that with many organizations. And then on the far right here, you'll see our direct model, where we also work directly with grant makers around their back of the house data, whether it's community data, programmatic data, GMS data, and then helping them better curate, organize, and tell a story of impact within that information. Here are some of the organizations that we work with. You can see a wide variety from the Ford Foundation and the Walton Foundation to lots of great family offices here locally, the Foglias, the Christopher family, and then obviously there's some awesome nonprofits sprinkled in here as well. But this just gives you an idea of the diversity of our work, and I think it can align with most folks in the social sector. Now, kind of an extension of Amber and Jay's slides around the importance of storytelling. We'll kind of touch on that a little bit. Again, more on the technical side. But as we all know, the last 2 years have been unique, have been complex, have been trying for all of us in a lot of different ways. And as we see the needs of the communities that we are serving constantly change, but there's tons of stories of impact that are out there right now. And there's lots of great work going on because obviously it's needed, right? It might be needed more than it's been needed in quite some time. And so many of us on this call are doing that work. So kudos to all of you. But it is kind of blurred, right? It is kind of a blurry sort of view. And that takes me to this next slide. I think this might be Jay's desk that he's hiding from us. But the question is how will your story stand out, right? So, in the work that you do, there is a little bit of competition. We're all doing great work, but we're all, at the end of the day, sometimes striving for the same resources. In doing that, you have to think about how your story of impact might stand out from another organization's. And to us at UpMetrics, we believe that a story, that you need a story that inspires action. And the way we've defined action on this slide is stakeholder engagement, right? So that could be volunteerism, that could be sitting on a board, that could be mission aligned capital. It really depends. But again, you want to inspire something, or it might just be clicking through an email and reading a post or reading a blog post. And then your organization sits on the mind of that individual that you did some outreach to. So really think through that of what, stakeholder engagement means to your organization and what action that you're trying to inspire and how can you do that with your story of impact, whether it's a quantitative or qualitative or a mixed method story, which we'll kind of dive into a little bit later. Now, the idea of becoming a bit more data-driven as a storyteller. I saw Denali from Denali on this Zoom, and she's probably seen this many a time. So Denali, don't zoom out on me. But we use this methodology called DECAL in the core of our work at UpMetrics, and we break that up into 4 steps, which is called define, collect, analyze, and leverage. And this is really the framework of the work that, of our work when we take it on with any organization. And this is kind of where we start and how we move forward. And that first step of defining is making sure you understand what your impact framework is for your organization, defining those key data points, and then understanding how to track that information through whatever tools you might need or you have at your disposal. In this step, you want to make sure everyone is collecting the same data. You're baselining on your key metrics, then giving you the ability to track your trends over time, again, showing progress, right? So define is that first step. Next is collecting your data, right? So here is where you develop a game plan on how to collect your data. And the 2 key words here are making sure the data collection is accurate and consistent, right? So accuracy and consistency when it comes to your data collection is key, because as you know, bad data in is bad data out, right? So you really need to think through how to get this accuracy and consistency across your organization. Some of you have 100 school sites. You have lots of people collecting data, and that's a challenge, right? To get everybody on the same place. And this last piece here is making sure you're collecting your data and centralizing it all in one place. Here are some ideas of how you can do some data collection, whether it's surveys, your program data, publicly available data. We'll jump into that a little bit later. And then, of course, stories, right? Stories on the qualitative side. And I think Amber's slide of taking those rows and rows and rows of just GPA and academic data and telling the story of 2 individuals is so key, right? So you can't downplay that. And I encourage you to kind of think through that as we go through these slides here. The third step here is analyze, right? And this is where sometimes organizations that we work with have defined and collected relatively well. And then we can kind of come in and help them analyze. And here's where you start to review that data, see your progress towards goal. You can leverage a tech platform to do this. Maybe it's an UpMetrics, maybe it's something else, but use those tools, be able to filter your data, look at demographic data, look at performance data, look at publicly available data. And this is really you're chopping up all of that data and looking to pull out those stories and how to then combine the quantitative and the qualitative to really move forward. So this step is really key, but it takes time to get there, right? It doesn't happen day 1, week 1. There's a lot of planning and prep that might take you to this step, but know that when you get there, it's a really good feeling to know we got something, now we can move forward. And the last piece is leveraging, right? So I kind of touched on that in a little bit of the last slide. You've measured, what next steps you need to take. And now you want to leverage that data to look at internal decision-making, getting those actionable insights that you need, combining the qual and the quant, and now then looking to tell that story externally. And then the key word here is, attracting that mission-aligned capital. That capital could be funding, the capital could be people, that capital could be just folks knowing about what you're doing, because not always funding, right? But a lot of it is just sharing that story. But again, back to the story that we saw earlier of the 2 students and their photos, not just their academic transcripts. That's key, right? So really think about in the leverage component, how you're going to do it, where you're going to take it. And then you also want to be consistent. You don't want to just leverage the data, share it out, and then do it 12 months later, right? You want to develop a schedule and a system as how to do that. That makes the most sense for your organization, but then also your stakeholders. Here are a couple examples, a little fast, of where theory meets practice. And so a couple of the partners that we spotlighted here. We spotlighted some work with Thrive Chicago, which is some of you that are local, definitely know the work that they do. And Thrive is kind of, in my opinion, and I feel like I've learned a lot about Thrive the last 4 years, but the idea of they're this like sort of backbone of a lot of the youth development programming going on in Chicago. They provide that data infrastructure. They've also started to do convenings, bring building capacity, technical assistance. We've supported them in that work. This is a photo we found somewhere of some of their work with the MBK and the BAM work that they've done over time. And what we did with them, just to give you all an example again of how we can work, and just to give you some ideas of different resources you can bring into the work that you're doing. Doesn't always have to be a company like ours, but there are a lot of folks doing this. Is we started off with helping them create a dashboard around census tract data, helping them understand the community context when they're evaluating groups. So not just looking at the group itself, but then also looking at the community that they're working in and the issues and the data points related to that. The ability to collect community feedback quickly. We have a really robust survey tool called the Data Collector, which they've been able to use to bring in information seamlessly and visualize qualitative and quantitative points quickly. And then the last piece here, the ability to drive insights to iterate, right? So now you have this data. Now let's figure out what's going on and let's move forward. And down here is just a simple, we call these widgets or visualization of, their organizations and which neighborhoods were they supporting through their work. So lots of times getting information like this can be very challenging, even though it's simple information. And that's where a tool like ours and the services team like ours can kind of connect those dots. One more group is our work with the Black Equity Collective. So this is a really neat organization, that we're working with in Southern California. It's a public-private partnership with Black Equity as its central component. My colleagues who are on the West Coast did more of this work than me. I kind of was an observer, but I definitely wanted to share it. Some of the work that Black Equity Collective, for those of you in the Chicago area, kind of reminds me of the work that AMP's doing. So if you're looking for a parallel there's definitely some parallels there. But 15 nonprofits all around empowering social justice. They're addressing systemic racism and education, criminal justice, and workforce development. And so they have this collective, and they're looking for ways to measure impact of this collective. So they brought us in to help support that. And then here are some of the things we've accomplished with them so far. It's an ongoing relationship. We're very excited about it, but just we're having them bring in survey data, track progress against their membership goals, visualize data around where their members are to make sure that the work they're doing is in the geographic focus areas that are of interest to them or prioritized of them. And the last piece here is the idea of building data-centered feedback loops, which is key. So this ongoing feedback, the ability to get ongoing feedback quickly and seamlessly integrate that into a platform where you can visualize it and you're not going through rows and rows of spreadsheets is very key. So again, here's another one. You have 15 members, and how are you funded? Simple question, but not always a simple answer, right? And then to aggregate that over 15 folks in a geographic region can be challenging. So this is kind of something then the group got that data and then kind of understood maybe where Black Equity Collective as an organization might need to do some more advocacy as it relates to some of these stakeholders. So I know I'm kind of coming up a little bit close to time here, so I might go somewhat quickly on some of these. Jay had asked me to share some more specifics on how the platform might look for those of you that are looking for more of that technical support. And some of like the keywords that kind of come out in our platform are the ability to centralize data. So think of our platform as a mini relational database that allows you to have data collection tools, custom surveys. We have a survey template library. We have the ability to do third-party integrations with tools like Salesforce, Google Sheets. Very easy to use and user-friendly. You can customize your data collection. So it's not very prescriptive. It's kind of a blank canvas in terms of how we can support you, but really easy to do. Up here, you can see, we have publicly available data with US Census Tract and SDG data, and that data collector tool can be customized as needed. You can centralize your quantitative data here, which is very great to do and simple to do. And I'm sure many of you have a lot of it. But the one thing that we do, which is a little unique, back to the Yasmin's comment in the chat, is mixed methods, right? So now you can bring in your qualitative data and start to centralize stories, as we like to call them. And these are some of these stories here. And you can aggregate these, you can organize them. It's a very powerful component of the tool. Mixed methods is my term of the day. I'm getting paid $5 every time I say mixed methods, just kidding. But the idea of mixed methods is huge. Where here's an example where you have some quantitative data and you have some qualitative data side by side. So this is an excerpt from one of our dashboards, and you can kind of look at the storytelling on the left in long form, and on the right-hand side, you can see some more of the traditional quantitative data that we're all used to seeing, which is something that's really neat, something that really excites me, keeps me really motivated in the work that we do. Because again, those stories are why we do this work. it's not because kids have a 3.2 GPA versus a 2.89, right? It's the story behind the individual that's really key. The idea of being able to share these dashboards really quickly, you could take a link, you could take a PDF, share the dashboard within seconds, and that's that idea and that notion of data for all, and not just one person in an organization that kind of owns the data. You can integrate goals tracking as necessary. You can take these visualizations, you can put them on an externally facing website, the idea of data for all there. And then lastly, Jay's mentioned a couple times today, the idea of collective impact, the ability of our tool to allow for organizations, for example, here's an organization with, I think there's 12 or there's, I can't count real quick, but 9 organizations here under one collective impact umbrella. You can roll that data all up into one spot for a kind of hierarchical foundational view. And then the individual grantees can go in and kind of see their data on an individual basis. So that's the kind of quick little intro to the work that UpMetrics is doing and some ideas of how you can, leverage more qualitative data to storytell in the work that you're taking on. And I'll stop sharing, and Jay, and Amber, defer to you for how we want to, if there's questions or things like that.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, please enter them in the chat now. Otherwise, we can kind of move on to our other presentations. But just to kind of hit home today's theme, I think, and I put this in the chat, the reason we wanted to showcase UpMetrics specifically is that, and goes back to our example earlier, is that providing kind of that mixed methods capability is really critical to being able to tell a story, right? Who are the people behind the numbers? And this is an excellent platform that often, not often do you get that out of database partners. And I know databases are also a struggle for organizations. And so instead thinking about it in a real assets-based way of how can this help us tell our story? I know we have a question in the chat, so I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, Vinay, there's one question. How a person with community organizing background can help with an evaluation, a question near to my heart.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is great experience, right? To really help anyone working on a project as it relates to data collection or evaluation, to validate the assumptions, to validate the means of data collection, to give feedback on how respondents might feel about the data that is being asked from them or that is being reported back. I mean, I'll use the example. I was a high school teacher for a handful of years, and you see lots of stuff going on in ed tech. You see lots of research studies, but that idea of being in the classroom for 5 periods a day, 50 minutes, that is the real data right there, and that is the real work. And with community organizing, I feel like there's a parallel there. So those boots on the ground experience is so key. And anyone doing any sort of evaluation, and I'm sure Pi role models this best, is you're asking those folks first what their opinion on it, what their opinion is on what's going on and how to best navigate the study, and then referencing that support over time and getting those feedback loops is key. So I think it's key. I love that question, and I think we always have to start there, because I think that community organizing work is like that really micro level. Foundational work that impacts a lot of the work that's going on.
And thank you, Vinay, so much for your insights today. Next up, we have Cristina Cordova Herrera from the Chicago Women's Foundation, who's going to tell us the awesome story of the Shecovery and how they've used data to support marketing and promotion of how the Chicago Foundation for Women is going to be supporting women as we come out of this pandemic. And so really excited to welcome Cristina here today. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you everyone in attendance. I'm really excited to share a little bit about our Shecovery initiative, Chicago Foundation for Women's Shecovery initiative, and the accompanying report. At Chicago Foundation for Women, through our community-centered approach, we know that when women are healthy, safe, and financially secure, they lift up their families and entire communities. So this is where our premise of Shecovery began. For far too long, women, especially women of color, have been kept at a disadvantage in an inequitable system. The COVID-19 pandemic has only magnified the unequal treatment of women. Chicago Foundation for Women has supported women and girls in the Chicago region for more than 36 years. But if the last 2 years have showed us anything, is that an unprecedented crisis must be met with an unprecedented, coordinated response to drive change. That's where Chicovery comes in. The Chicovery Initiative, launched in September 2021, is a commitment from Chicago Foundation for Women to identify, uplift, fund, advocate for, and support a more equitable system to ensure women and their families emerge from the pandemic stronger than before. Chicovery is a concentrated effort to support women, girls, trans, and gender non-binary people of color during this extraordinary, challenging time. Chicovery is a call to action to invest in our communities, an advocacy agenda for the policies we need to see for real change, and a roadmap of how we get there. Our Chicovery report supports the initiative and is a foundational document that includes the data, the stories, the advocacy agenda, the grant-making efforts, all in one place. The report has been instrumental in the creation of the Chicovery website, messaging used on social channels to support the initiative. To support Chicovery, Chicago Foundation for Women identified 4 key strategies designed to create conditions for sustained transformative change. In addition, over the next 2 years, we will raise $11 million to invest in these key strategies, which are get women back to work, address the eviction crisis, care for our caregivers, and demand an anti-racist healthcare system. Our main objectives were to create an antidote to the She Session, which of course we came up with Chicovery. And I'll give credit where credit is due. Our president and CEO is the one who came up with Chicovery. C. Nicole Mason, president of the Institute for Women's Policy Research, coined the term She Session to highlight the disproportionate economic impact women were facing at the time. At the onset of the pandemic, our team worked to think about the long-term impacts the pandemic would be having on women, which were already visible due to the loss of jobs in job sectors mainly occupied by women. We put together an advocacy agenda that was comprehensive and addressed these issues focused on an equitable Chicovery. We trademarked Chicovery and purchased the domain to help us tell the message when it was ready. When she recovers, we recover. It's a simple message. The reality is that pre-pandemic, normal wasn't working for women either. Women were still underpaid for similar work as men. Paid leave was still an issue, and childcare was as costly or more than it is now. We cannot go back to normal. So our efforts are truly centered on supporting an equitable recovery, reimagining the workplace, and supporting the most vulnerable. For when the most vulnerable among us can thrive, we all thrive. Women, when they receive the resources and tools they need, not only uplift themselves, they uplift their families and entire communities. At CFW, we intentionally put an emphasis on community-centered stories from our grantees on the front lines. The impact and response in real time from our grantee partners has been critical to ensuring Chicovery was actually addressing the most pressing issues to date, which is how we came up with our 4 key strategies. The stories were just one part. So seeking out data that supported the stories we were hearing became a main component of the report, of which PIE.org was instrumental. Early on, we knew women were going to be the most impacted by the pandemic. The shelter-in-place orders increased domestic violence calls exponentially. Many of the sectors where women were represented lost jobs, due to the closure in the early weeks of the pandemic, with other sectors where women were highly represented were then deemed essential, like healthcare. The December 2020 jobs report, which is reflected in some of these stats, showed 5.4 million jobs were lost by women during the first 10 months of the pandemic. A year later, the December 2021 jobs report showed more than 1 million women still have not returned to the workforce, citing caregiving as one of their main concerns. The other main concern is pay equity. We also were looking to counter the information overload that was happening. As you can see here on this slide, there's a lot of stats. And as Jay alluded before, stats without really story or an amplified narrative don't really tell us much. So we were being inundated with data on a daily basis. Number of cases, impact on jobs, lives lost. All of that creates a sense of doom and overwhelm that leads to being numbed by the numbers. Our ultimate goal was to create a unifying message that resonated with our supporters, folks in our sector, and the community at large to help us address these issues. We also had a few challenges. So given that we were using available data to support our hypothesis of women and women of color being most impacted by the pandemic, the available data was a year or nearly 2 years behind. In addition, the data was incomplete. Trans and gender non-binary individuals are missing from available data, and we call that out in the report as being a challenge. There are many reasons for this. Many trans and gender non-binary folks do not trust sharing their information with the government and fear for their safety. For similar reasons, immigrant communities are also not fully represented in the data. Even with data around cases and lost lives, Latinos were still undercounted as many were not self-identifying. So there was a lot of gaps that we needed to fill through storytelling to address some of these issues in the data collection. We knew these communities were being impacted, but that impact was not quantifiable, which is where the grantee stories were really important. The data can only tell us so much, as we've heard from Jay and Vinay earlier today. As we look to emphasize community-centered approaches, coordinating with grantees and ensuring their stories were as they wanted to be presented took more time. However, including their perspective and their work within communities was critical to ensuring the message of Shecovery came across loud and clear. Our impact so far. The Shecovery report website and overall messaging have helped Chicago Foundation for Women share our work with a broader audience. The pandemic has helped more people pay attention to these issues. Even the president is talking about care as infrastructure. Who would have thought? Let me be clear. The Shecovery initiative is not new work for Chicago Foundation for Women. This work we've been doing is the same since our founding in 1985. What is different is how we're talking about it, how we're centering Black, Indigenous, and people of color, how we're centering trans and gender non-binary individuals, and how we're inviting individuals, elected officials, corporations, fellow foundations, and funders to join us in these efforts. The reality is that we cannot do this work alone, and we need all hands on deck to ensure that women have what they need, not only to survive, but to thrive. Shecovery has helped unify our fundraising messaging. Our appeals to the donor community are more cohesive, consistent, and clear. The messaging has helped us tie discrete fundraising campaigns into a timely, sticky theme with a bigger vision for systems change. We see the Shecovery report as a foundational document that supports our outreach and grounds us in the work already taking place across our communities. To date, we've raised $3 million plus $1 million in planned gift commitments. We also received our largest institutional grant to date of $500,000. To drive Shikhavri in fiscal year 2022, we've invested $1.3 million in grants to 67 Chicago area organizations, of which 62% are led by women of color. Through our use of data and storytelling, in a short amount of time, people have heard our message and have been activated to join us in making an equitable Shikhavri a reality. Here I have a couple of examples of how we've used the data to inform our website, our Shikhavri website, which you can visit at shikhavri.com. This is an example of our Get Women Back to Work pillar that has images from our grantees, as well as statistics included in the report. And then there's an option to learn more. So the stories are really embedded through our website and our messaging platforms. And that's it. So I will stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. First, does anyone have any questions? Feel free to put any questions in the chat. And I just want to say it was such a great experience working with Christina and the Chicago Foundation for Women and producing the Shikhavri report. Jay actually put the link to the Shikhavri report in the chat so you can view it. It's a wonderful document. All right. So if there are no questions right now, feel free to continue to put questions in the chat as we move along. And we'll make sure that we discuss them later on. And if we don't get to them during our Pi Day, we will definitely address them later. And we do have a comment from Laura Pruitt. Acknowledging the work and time it takes to build baseline and collect stories, how can one begin sharing as the, sorry, we gotta, excuse me. Okay, how can one begin sharing as the data story work is being built?
Well, for us, thank you for your question, your comment. I think for CFW, it was really important to create a mechanism for grantees that they can submit stories in real time. So part of our grantee agreement, we do have a portal where grantees can share some of their successes, some of their challenges. Also through our site visits with our grantees, we do ask, given the pandemic, like that's been an ongoing topic of our site visits, just how are you addressing, the new issues impacting your community? What have been some things that you have changed in order to ensure that you're serving the community as best as you can in this moment? So I think sharing the process really is about being transparent and also understanding with our grantees that we want to showcase their work. And, we are a funding organization. We don't have a lot of programs that are based out of our organization. So our work truly is in partnership with our grantees. And we don't want to be a funder that is just, spotlighting just all of the successes. It's really around the challenges as well. And some of that is highlighted in the stories in the report, struggles with remote work and remote learning, transitioning to virtual services for a lot of our grantees was a huge hurdle because they were a lot in person. So really supporting some of those transitions, I think, was really important, and including that in some of our conversations with our grantees.
Thank you, Christina. Uh, so guys, we are going to take a 5-minute break and come back at 10 o'clock so we can dive into our panel discussion about storytelling in a collective impact context. Again, thank you so much, Vinay and Christina, for your presentations and uplifting our theme of what data storytelling really looks like. Thank you guys, and see you guys back at 10 o'clock.
Welcome back, everyone. And thank you to all, to Christina and Vinay for your amazing insights, and to my colleagues at PI. My name is Anna Marin. I am an evaluation and strategy coach here at PI.org, and I'm also a co-chair with the Cicero Community Collaborative, which is a collective impact initiative in Cicero. And so we're going to spend some time talking with three amazing people about collective impact. I just want to explain collective impact a minute. So it is a formal way for organizations and institutions and individuals to come together to make systems level change. And it's different from coalitions and collaborations in that collective impact has a specific model with certain components. And so those components are that there's a common agenda with the shared vision. There's shared measurement, for continuous improvement and for mutual accountability, very important. There's mutually reinforcing activities that are coordinated toward that shared goal and support individual activities within the collective impact initiative. There is continuous communication that's based on trust, and there is some sort of backbone organization or team or individual that really coordinates the work and makes sure everything is moving forward towards success. And the most important part of collective impact are relationships. So without relationships, we can't do this work together, and we can't make effective change. We can't understand how to work together and how to honor each other's commitment and strengths to this change that we're working toward together. So I want to invite you all here today into relationship with my three panelists today. We have Chelsea Ridley from the North Lawndale Reads at Open Books, Joey Frankovich with We Go Together for Kids, and Jackie Rosa with United Way. Welcome all of you today. I just want to get started with a question. If you could just introduce yourself and answer the question. So what is the story that you want to tell with your work? And Chelsea, if you want to get started.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Chelsea Ridley. I'm the project director for North Lawndale Reads at Open Books. North Lawndale Reads is a project of Open Books and the Staines Family Foundation with the lofty goals of ensuring that all youth in North Lawndale are ready for kindergarten and are on track to read at grade level by 3rd grade. I'm also the co-founder of the Lawndale Pop-Up Spot, which is a community museum in a shipping container by and for the residents of North Lawndale. I really want to tell this story about the everyday residents of the west and south sides of the city. I think data and high level numbers are really important, but I don't want the individual stories of the residents to get lost in the shuffle.
Thank you. That's really important. Joey, did you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure, thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm Joey Frankovich, and I am with We Go Together for Kids, which is a collective impact initiative in West Chicago. And for those of you not familiar with Chicago, broader Chicagoland region, we are 40 miles west of the city of Chicago in DuPage County. We have more than 40 community partners that represent more than 15 sectors, all working to support the health, safety, social, emotional well-being, and learning of children and families in West Chicago. And Anna, actually, you had a great segue for me. The story I was thinking I really wanted to tell was really how relationships truly are the foundation to collective impact work, that no matter what kind of data or story we are telling, it all is stemming from some sort of relationship somewhere, somehow, and how do we really talk about the impact of those relationships?
Great. Jackie.
Good morning, everyone. Jackie Rosa, Associate Vice President of Community Engagement at United Way of Metro Chicago. So I oversee our Neighborhood Network Initiative, which is our collective impact work that we do across 10 communities in the Chicagoland area. So really excited to be on the call today and see a lot of familiar faces. So the story that I want to tell is really from the funder perspective, meaning that as funders, we need to trust community, all right, because they know what's best for their community. We need to really think about lived experience
as real experience, right? So people who work and live in the community ultimately should have the say on how dollars should be allocated. So I think that's super important when thinking about community level work, right? They are the experts and we should be able to trust their lived experience.
Right, that's great. And so many of these topics are, I've thought about deeply, being a co-chair in Cicero, doing my own community organizing work. And so really, how are we bringing in data, relationships, and really making sure that voices from the front line, from the ground, from all the agencies, from all the partners are being told together. You know, how in the work that you all do, how have you specifically used data to highlight stories, to support the storytelling you want to tell? And really, what are the challenges? Because it's difficult, right? There's lots of different moving pieces, there are lots of different people involved. How do you use that data to uplift, and what have the challenges been that you faced? And whoever wants to get started, talk amongst each other.
I can kick us off. And I want to mention too, I know many of our We Go Together for Kids and DuPage County partners are on this call. I see a lot of familiar names and faces. So I certainly welcome all of you to throw your thoughts and feedback in the chat too, as we're chatting, because this work isn't led just by me or just by one organization, and it really is that collective. So would welcome any of your input. When I think about the data we've used to highlight and support enhanced storytelling, I really think about the last 2 years in particular of our work in West Chicago with We Go Together for Kids, that we really paused and took a moment to talk and think about data as a collective, so that we are careful to not put data up on a pedestal and collect data for the sake of collecting data, or collect numbers for the sake of being able to say, look at these numbers. We really wanted to take a moment to think about our 40 plus community partners, the various sectors, and how we all think about data and storytelling from our various perspectives. So because that is important, and that's a story that we want to contribute to lifting up. But when we come together as a collective to work on our shared goals, that common agenda that's a part of collective impact, how are we using similar language? How are we coming to the same agreement so that we are supporting each other and telling the same story around impact? Rather than conflicts or just not being on the same page. And so we really spent a lot of time taking a step back and going, how are we comfortable with data? How are we comfortable with storytelling? Who has expertise that they can bring to the table and help educate the rest of us and lift up the strengths that we're bringing to the table? And really thinking about all of the different opportunities to be able to tell stories. We've spent a lot of time in particular thinking about places where we are required to tell our story, if you will. I think about grant funding, reporting, or other kind of required places that different organizations or collectives might need to just be required to share their data, share their story. And while we want to make sure we are always responding to what is asked, how do we use those as opportunities to share a deeper story and to share the story that the community wants to have shared, rather than just simply telling the story we're told needs to be shared out, if that makes sense.
Yes, that resonates quite a bit in terms of like creating that narrative arc, using some shared language, but making sure that you're really taking into consideration all the different audiences that are out there that need to hear the story of what this collective impact initiative is doing.
So I would say that for us, something that's been the most challenging is really having our board really sort of rethink what data is and the impact of data and storytelling, because I think that we're so programmed. We're like, we live in a society where we really want like immediate results, right? Like this is just the way our society functions, right? We want our return on investment. And like when you're working in community, that's not how it happens, right? Especially when you're trying to make systemic change. Like these are long-standing issues that didn't happen overnight. And so for us to think that we're going to be able to make changes overnight is just not realistic. So one of the things that we worked really hard is to really retrain how our board thinks about data, how we think about outcomes that we're having happen in the community. And a lot of that has to come from the qualitative data versus the quantitative data, right? Because often we get so discouraged when we don't see, right, a child's reading grade level increasing, or this program not really meeting these goals that they said. And I think a lot of it has to do with, circumstances that are out of the control of that specific program, right? And so how do you tell that full story? How do you tell that holistic story? And how do you really think about qualitative data that helps inform what we're really trying to achieve? And I will say we're still working on it. it's a hard thing to do, but I will say we've made great strides with just our board, even our external partners, right? We have a lot of corporate partners that also sort of need to ground themselves, and we have to help ground them in what it really means to make change in the community.
Mhm.
Yeah, and for North Lawndale Reads, sort of going off of that, we're using data to really tell the stories that the community has said is important. And so when the community isn't coming to me or to our team and saying, I really want to see the third grader go from grading level D to E, they're saying, I just want to see kids with more books in their hands, kids engaging, kids less on their screens. That's a big one that we see all the time. Kids less on their screens, kids more with books in their hands and engaging with those. And so we've been really fortunate to be able to consult with community members and having them lead the evaluations work for North Lawndale Reads. We created an evaluation subcommittee that was headed by people who are doing work in the community and really asking them, what data do you want to collect? What's important for you for the campaign? And so we're experimenting with all of these new different ways of collecting data from the community's perspective. Now, we of course have to translate that into reports for funders and that sort of thing. So there's a little bit of both, but really having the community's voice leading this work has been great for us.
That really speaks to a lot of experience that I'm hearing you all say, and actually something that Christina brought up a little earlier, that capturing community voice is really critical, and you have a lot of agency and institutional partners sitting at the collective impact table that have very specific data sets that they need to, that they have in mind that they need to collect. And how do you translate that into language that, and hear back from community members on what they're really looking for, and having that become part of collective impact work? And also, what about community members that are reluctant to share because there isn't trust built there? They're asked on a one-off, oh, what do you think? Here's a survey, fill out a survey. And that poses a lot of challenge to making sure that this on the ground information is being able to get collected and really impact mostly the work that's happening in the initiatives. How do you make sure, what are the methods that you have all used in collecting that community voice? And I know community can mean a lot of different things too, right? Community can mean agency partners who are working on the ground. It can mean residents. There's lots of different groups of residents and what voices are being highlighted. But what methodologies have you used or would you like to use? Are there emerging practices that you've heard about that really need to be part of your work? How do you create that space? And specifically, how are we using these methods and that information to break down structural divisions to do the systems level work that we really want to achieve?
I can jump right in. And I want to give a huge shout out to Cicero Community Collaborative, as well as the Brighton Park Neighborhood Network. So they have done an amazing job with a community ambassador program. Some neighborhood networks call them parent mentors, but essentially what it is, it's residents that live in the community, right, that have relationships that are trained to be ambassadors of the coalition, are trained to be leaders in the community. And they've been amazing at collecting data, right? Because of course, you're gonna talk to your neighbor and you have a relationship with them. So you're gonna feel more willing to share information, right? And so that's been key in so many of our collective impact work, is that data collection being done by residents in the community, trusted ambassadors, also language, right? So many of our communities are, monolithic Spanish speakers. So if you have someone who's speaking your language, then you're going to feel more comfortable sharing information with them. You're going to be more likely not to be afraid, right? Because you're both speaking the same language. And so that's been huge. Also, I want to also highlight that many of our residents are undocumented. So there's a big fear, right, in giving data that might create, repercussions later on for them. And so again, being able to have that trusted relationship, that person in your community who's your neighbor, who's a mother at a school, collecting that data has been great.
Similarly, we have what we call a caregiver advisory committee that is made up of North Lawndale caregivers. And we use the word caregiver very intentionally so that we include parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents. We've even had some daycare providers on the call because all of these people in the neighborhood are providing care to North Lawndale's children. And so we launched this caregiver advisory committee last year in person to gain some feedback and to eventually get to the point where we will have that network of people on the ground doing that work that Jackie was just talking about. To speak to some challenges, ongoing pandemic sort of halted our opportunities to continue to do it in person. And so we were able to relaunch it this year virtually with the help of the Ready for K initiative that's also working on some similar goals in North Lawndale. So really finding other places in North Lawndale that we're all trying to do the same work. So let's do it together, talking about collective impact. Let's all do the work together if we're doing the same work. And so we relaunched it last month, actually, to some really good success. And we're able to gain some new caregivers into our network. But we also create opportunities for all different sorts of feedback and all different sorts of engagement. So we do have that community survey that we send out every year. I'm out in the community as often as I can. I go to all of the events in North Lawndale and use those informal opportunities also to get feedback and to gather information about what people want to see. So if I'm out in the community, I'm giving away books, but I'm also asking people, hey, do you read at home? If you don't, how can we help you? What are the things that you need in your life to help get that support? So really using every opportunity that you can in front of the community as an opportunity to gather information, gather data for better impact.
I really want to piggyback what Chelsea just said, because I think that's something that we're really starting to be much more intentional about too. I think often it's very easy to think about data and storytelling as you need to create something new. You need to find a new process, create a new system, find new resources, and that may be true for certain situations, certainly, but I think there is also credit to be given towards just rethinking a lot of the great ideas we're already doing. And Chelsea, what you just said is exactly one of those things that we've been much more intentional about around. There are all of these community events, community gatherings that already exist that are being provided by a whole host of agencies or community members. And when we're invited in, how do we use that as an opportunity to engage in dialogue, not only with other agencies who might be there, but also with community members? So for a concrete example, West Chicago, similar, I'm sure, to many of your communities that you work or serve in, observe National Night Out every year, which is really about connecting your local police department with the community and building those strong, healthy relationships. And so we hosted a table and we had our books and we had board games this year, which is very exciting. But we also created a visual activity that invited children of all ages, adults, any language that anyone might be comfortable in, to talk about what a safe community looks like to them, because that's something we've been exploring. But it offered an opportunity for people to just engage with each other. And it was so cool to watch children and adults together draw pictures, write words, multiple languages being used, and then post them up on a little makeshift easel that we brought with us because we were outside, and seeing them point to each other's feedback. So I think that's the other piece too, is including community voice is also about, as a backbone for collective impact, you're also a facilitator of building community. And so how are we not just collecting feedback for ourselves to use it for ourselves, but how are we using that to facilitate that dialogue? I will say, I think for We Go Together for Kids, we have often spent a lot of time relying on our direct service provider partners to kind of represent that direct community voice, which I think is very appropriate and I think is very trustworthy, but it does not get us to that place of directly involving, including, engaging community members in regular dialogue around decision-making in the community, around what's working well, what's not working well. And so while we continue to always engage in those conversations with our partners, they have so much strength and expertise. We've spent spent recently a lot of time thinking about how do we intentionally create opportunities for the community to lead that conversation and invite us in when they feel it's appropriate. So most recently, and Anna, actually, I think you were with us in a couple of meetings, we've been thinking a lot about community assessments and how do we gauge what's working well, what's not working well, but be really intentional because we know there's so many surveys, there's so many town hall forums, and they're all important. And so we work to encourage residents to also contribute to other partners opportunities to give that feedback, but how do we create a space to be able to have that deep conversation without continuing to oversaturate or maybe ask this essentially the same questions other people are asking? How are we as providers working together to share some of that data and some of that feedback so that we can be working more efficiently together in those relationships rather than possibly duplicating, by accident, because we haven't taken the time to just step back and have that conversation.
Yeah, Joy, I think you bring up a really important point because we in collective impact, right? You really want community voice and input and information and use it as data, right? But how are we making sure that there are avenues for residents and people directly impacted by the work? How are they part of the decision-making processes? I come from community organizing, and a lot of times you have an organization that's dedicated to community organizing that has a small group of folks and then that go through leadership development, and they have a decision-making table that belongs to an organization. And it's really hard to get that kind of those folks and that model brought into a larger sphere of collective impact because of all the different partners and institutions that are involved, some of whom don't have that model of direct community engagement or certainly not community decision making. And so what is the way that you all have struck that balance between having folks who are dedicated to having this voice be front and center, other institutions that just don't necessarily have the knowledge, are used to more of a top-down approach, all these different institutions and organizations? How do you manage with collective impact work, making sure that the stories are told authentically, that people feel like they have a place and a lane and they can do that impact work in the way that they need to?
So time, it takes a long time, right? And I also think that capacity building is huge. And when I talk about capacity building, it's multiple prongs of capacity building, right? So it's the capacity building that the organizations need to be able to be supported in collective impact work, because a lot of social services, they have their day-to-day, right? They're meeting people, they're direct service providers. And so how do you provide capacity for that organization to be also able to do the collective impact work, right? Whether that be through staffing, right? So one of the things that United Way, with all of our neighborhood networks, is that we have a staff person that typically is staffed at an organization that has longstanding relationships in the community that serve as sort of help do all the logistics of the convening of the coalition of the collective impact work that's happening, because that is almost solely their full-time job, because it just requires so much work. And so by being able to support that from United Way dollars, we're not asking an organization to hire somebody new, but we're funding that, right? We're funding that position because even though it's not a United Way employee, we recognize that that position is critical to moving everything forward, right? Scheduling meetings is a pain in the butt and someone needs to do it and it takes a long time, right? So it's these little things that we always need to think about when it comes to how do we engage folks, how do we make sure that it's not a top-down approach, right? United Way is not, it's not a United Way staff person, because that also shifts the power dynamic, right? We're really intentional of saying, we're not gonna hire somebody to work at United Way to convene the coalition. We're gonna give the dollars to an agency in that community that has longstanding relationships to identify the person that should be convening that coalition, right? So you change up that power dynamic. The other thing I would say that's huge is, residents being paid to be part of the coalitions, right? This is also a job for them, right? They have their own 9-to-5 thing that they're doing. And just like so many of us, that this is part of our, roles and responsibilities in our job. And we're essentially also being paid to be there. They should be too. So stipends go a long way.
right? Professional development, we also help support that through the work that we do in capacity building is, you want to be able to engage residents, but you want to meet them where they're at. So it's really unfair to have a resident come into a meeting that doesn't feel like their voice is going to be heard, that doesn't feel like they've had the leadership development to be able to contribute in a way that's going to be authentic. And so I think, the big things I would take away is, dollars need to be used to support that engagement, and that capacity building needs to be folded into every aspect of the work that you do.
I would agree with everything Jackie's saying, and I will also give a shout out that the neighborhood networks that Jackie keeps referring to, We Go Together for Kids, is actually one of those United Way neighborhood networks, and we're very grateful that we do have access to funds through United Way that do allow us to have a person, namely myself and some other staff, who can do that facilitation of bringing people together. I mean, quite frankly, finding meeting space when you are in person and thinking about, okay, if we're going to do stipends, what's the appropriate dollar amount, really thinking through some of the details so that you can bring some thoughts to a group for them to respond to, while also creating space for them to continue to engage in that dialogue. I think, Jackie, you also make a really good point around thinking about power differentials in a lot of these spaces and how, how preloaded the various people who are coming to your tables are to having some of those conversations. We spend a lot of time in West Chicago thinking about how we define community engagement and what is it we're truly trying to achieve through some of our community engagement strategies. And we often find ourselves really thinking about, well, what's the difference between community involvement versus community engagement? Because it's very different to welcome community members to a table, throw a bunch of ideas at them and ask them to just seal that with a nice pretty bow on top. And then we can say, great, we got community buy-in on this, versus community engagement. How are we really creating spaces for community members to engage in the decision-making that is happening? And I think a lot of that goes back to the data collection and storytelling component, which is why we're here today, in that I think is often the powerful story that we're often trying to tell back out to funders, to community members, that it is about the process that we're engaging in to make our way there. It's often less about where we've actually quite gotten to, because to a point someone made earlier, there have been very few days I have woken up and come to work and the day went at all how I thought it was going to go the moment I woke up. And that's the reality of this work. So I think being able to also tell the story of that messiness really honors the reality of what it means to try and disrupt systems that have destroyed communities of color, and that it's messy, and that sometimes you're going to have to try things and you're going to make mistakes. And so you have to honor those mistakes, you have to acknowledge them, and then you have to learn from them. And collecting data and telling stories is, I think, a component to doing a lot of that work.
Yeah, and I think you really have to be open to the messiness, right? You have to be able to try things out. And if they don't work, that's fine. Try something else. That might not work either. Pi has been working with us for North Lawndale Reads, and we've been trying out a whole bunch of different types of evaluation. We've got surveys, we got QR codes, we got questionnaires, we got all sorts of stuff. And we just keep trying it out to see what works best. But I also wanted to speak a little bit about that power differential that you were talking about. For North Lawndale Reads, we make sure that we bring everyone to the same table. So there's no hierarchies. The funders for North Lawndale Reads are at the same table as the community members, are at the same table as the community organizations, and are all working together on collective decision-making. So that's what our steering committee is, and they make the decisions. And so we want to make sure that we are getting those caregiver advisory committee members trained up and have the capacity to be a part of the steering committee. Because I think sometimes we just like you said, we just want to throw community members into these rooms when they might not be ready. And so you have to make sure that they're ready to be a part of these conversations and feel empowered to make the decisions for their community.
Yeah, and the community members that have been most mentioned here are parents and caregivers. And I think we know from experience that they tend to be the moms. And so, making sure that they have equal voice, that they're, compensated both monetarily and all the ways that can be offered, I think is really critical to breaking down the structural barriers, getting voices on an equal playing field. I just want to let you know there's lots of things happening in the chat and your comments are being validated and we have some questions coming up. It's hard for me to look at both things. So I want to ask a final official question, and then let's go to the chat and figure out what all your cheerleaders and peers are saying over here. But really speaking to this messiness, it's come up a couple times from many of you. Like, what is the advice you have about people in collective impact who want to do collective impact work, both from the perspective of, the coordinators and, nonprofit leaders and funders, and specifically about like this, getting in all the information, taking in the data, and how you're telling a story about that? What advice would you give?
That it's all subject to change. So I will start off by saying that, 2 years ago, right, officially 2 years ago, we have all of our neighborhood networks do essentially a one-year work plan, which is like their strategic plan for the year, right? And so they all put so much time and effort, had their coalitions meet, their steering committees, and put together these amazing plans, right? And then COVID hit, and that plan went out the window. And United Way said, all the resource or the dollars that we were funded for, and even though you had them set to these specific outcomes and goals with this work plan, we know that's not what you need right now, right? So if you want to use those dollars and do direct cash assistance, because that's what folks need in this moment, if you want to do those dollars and, support a food bank, if you want to use those dollars at the very beginning of COVID when we were all searching for PPE, go ahead and use them. And I think that that's the beauty of working in coalition and working in collaborative, is that, you've built this trust up for over a year, so that when something like a pandemic, who would have thought, hits, you have the mechanism to disperse dollars quickly in a community in a way that is strategic and trusted. And as a funder, you recognize that in that moment, the goals that you had set just no longer matter, right? And so you're listening to community, you're trying to listen to the folks on the front line. And I think that, this pandemic has really changed the way I hope funders continue to fund, right? Which is unrestricted dollars are super important. We can make all the plans, but guess what? Things happen and they're subject to change, and we just got to roll with it.
Speaking to sort of exactly what I said before, things are going to fail. You're going to try things out and it's just not going to work, but don't let that discourage you. You have to keep trying. So that's one thing. But then I also just want to make sure that personally in this work, I never want to let the individuals that I meet and their voices get lost in the shuffle. And so when I meet people, I want to make sure that I'm capturing the data of their everyday lives, their stories, their lives, all of the things that are happening. Don't forget to capture that, because that guides a lot of the heart of the work that you're going to do, which sometimes might get lost in the shuffle of just data, but it is data.
I echo exactly what Chelsea and Jackie said. And for me, I think the common denominator there, I am so sorry. I was fine until we got on a panel, and now my voice keeps cracking, is the relationships. That for me, the relationships are always going to need to be the priority, even on those days where you need to make hard decisions about what data you're going to collect because you have a report you need to get done. That is the reality of the way the field works. But when it comes time to having those hard conversations about what we tried didn't work, why didn't it work, how are we going to pivot and try and do better next time, it is much harder to do that, and it is much harder to create a safe environment to have those vulnerable conversations if you don't have those relationships. And so for us, I mean, when I say prioritize, I mean, every formal meeting, where we actually picked a time and intended to come together to have a conversation, whether that's with partners or community, whoever that is, we always start with some sort of relationship builder activity that allows us to come together as whole human beings working together. And so while we will always be coming to the table with the various hats we're wearing, whether it's caregiver, representative of an agency, et cetera, we're still, the approach I take is that anyone who might be coming to any We Go Together for Kids table is someone who wants to contribute to making the world a better place. So how do we honor that in the way we engage with each other? So then when things don't go the way they're supposed to, because they won't, you will have those days where things do not go the way you want. You have a collective ready to say, that's a bummer. That really doesn't feel good that what we worked on didn't work, but how are we going to move forward in service of each other and of the community? So my go-to is, if there's anything that I would recommend, is building those relationships and finding people who can help you facilitate those relationships to that relationship development.
This is fantastic.
I think you also have to have good relationships with your funders too, because it takes a lot to say, man, we had a year where a lot of the stuff that we did failed. And your funders in some ways have to be okay with that and trust you. It's very important for the funders to trust that the organizations that are doing the community work are doing the best that they can and have the expertise to do it. So fund us and let us do it. We're going to fail a little bit. We're going to fly a little bit, but you have to let us do it.
I am very happy to see funders really like live out this perspective and think deeply and critically around, the community organizations that are leading this work. And I want to thank you all for your responses to these questions. There are more questions and comments that are being generated in the chat. So one thing that came up is this, going back to Vinay, this mixed methods perspective. So we've talked a lot about like collecting stories from community members. Does any of you have an example of like how you're really using quantitative data as well? There's a comment here from Yasmin Bey that there are initiatives that lack quantitative research. Have you had any strategies to make sure that that is part of it as well? And how do you do it? And how do you balance it with, the actual like stories that you're collecting from community members and others?
So I think there's multiple ways you can answer this question, and they're all very right. I think one way that we've thought about it is often we're trying to lead with more of that storytelling quantitative side of things and then follow it up with some hard numbers. Because I've at least found that most people, funders or board of directors of partner agencies, are a bit more receptive when they can feel the data in their heart, and telling you the number of families who came to a Zumba class for the last 6 months is important, and you want to share that because it contributes to health and wellness, and you want to make that case. But I think starting with something that really grabs attention and then following it up, we use, I call them nuggets of data or drops of information. So we're always thinking about, okay, we're going to tell a very lovely, robust story that's about one person or a family's lived experience and really honor that experience for them. And then we, on a Facebook post or in an annual report, and then we'll add in a line or two at the end that says, and this is, this contributes to our youth and family health strategy. And did you know that in 2021, this many, West Chicago residents engaged in health and wellness strategies? So it kind of creates a dialogue where we're leading with those lived experiences and then following up with some hard numbers. But I think what's also key is always knowing your audience, right? So sometimes funders do just want to know those numbers, and that's lovely. So you can have those ready, and then you can be prepared to give, a quick snapshot of then what does that actually look like in a day-to-day life, inside of West Chicago.
Mm-hmm. And there's another question here by Paula Santos that kind of dovetails with this idea of research, right? So it's a loaded word. It can be a scary word. And the term that she uses is extractive research practices. And so, how have you dealt with challenges that you've seen where, if you've seen them, where research becomes this extractive mechanism could be damaging rather than fortifying to a community?
For us, with North Lawndale Reads and Open Books, we make sure that all of the work that we do is beneficial on the front end before we even go in to collect any information. So before, I want to make sure that I'm able to give something, give resources, give books, give programming, give something to the community, so that I'm not just trying to get information. But at the same time, it's important to highlight that this information that we might be collecting is beneficial to the neighborhood. So we're not just taking from you just for our own benefit. We're getting information, we're gathering research in order to better serve. And so it's about communication, and it's about making sure that you are showing that this is mutually benefiting us all.
That trust and relationship building piece, that is really the foundation.
Yeah, I think too, sometimes reframing this research too, I think for us, we spent a lot of time thinking about what language are we using when we talk about research? Because to me, the most important research, the most contributors of research are the people living the experience. But I don't know how many non-academic, non-professional researcher has ever been told that their input is important and contributes to something bigger, and have kind of almost not given permission, but have been empowered to see themselves in that way. And I do think that there is some onus on a collective impact initiative like a We Go Together for Kids to offer that empowerment and to create that environment for people to be able to engage in that dialogue. And so sure, maybe sometimes after you have a lovely conversation in the community, you might go back to your desk and kind of reframe yourself around, okay, now how do I use this in that more formal research kind of method that I think, Paula, maybe that's what you're referencing, but please correct me if that's not kind of what you were getting at. And kind of, I think that's one of the pieces around when you are kind of the backbone of the person facilitating. Some of that I think sometimes falls on you to do some of that thinking around how are we reframing and offering that reframing back out to others, to our community partners, to our funders, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. There's another question here, I think that goes well with that as well, with creating balance and there's a question here around culturally responsive evaluation, which might not pertain, the evaluation piece might not pertain to everything here, but how are you what are the specific methods that you use to, create equity? What is the framework you're using? If you have one, what are the lenses that you use to make sure that equity is like just front and center with the systems change work? Some of which I think we've already talked about with Community Voice, but if there's any other additions.
Yeah, so I'm going to say, back to sort of a United Way as an organization and as a funder. So, we're really being intentional now of including equity in the way that United Way does like our internal work, right? And working internally with, again, our board. I'm going to keep talking about our board and our corporate partners, because I think that we have a lot of work to do internally. We're still working on it, right? It's learning every single day. And so by being able to internally do the work, then we can be better external partners for our community. And so we created an equity committee, and it's not just about, yes, diversity inclusion is important. It's super important. But at the same time, like, how are the practices internally that United Way has created? How are we making sure that we're looking at ourselves, changing our practices within our organization so that we can be better external partners in the community?
I will say We Go Together for Kids kind of loosely, our official evaluation framework is results-based accountability. And I can throw that in the chat. And it's a very particular framework. And I say loosely because we've kind of taken it and run with it over the last couple of years and kind of morphed it into something that fits our kind of our vibe a little bit better, or a little more strongly. But I think what we really enjoyed about results-based accountability is that it really starts about what are our ends we're trying to reach and working our way back to our means, so that we're always staying on track with collectively what our common shared goals are. But then it allows us that nimbleness to talk about strategy and data and where do we need to change, when a pandemic occurs and everything we planned for the first, 3 years of this no longer is applicable because we can't do half of it. And it also really emphasizes the importance of shared language. So we remove acronyms, we remove jargon, and we really say, what are we talking about in plain language? So to Chelsea's point earlier, when you bring anyone to a table, no one is innately having more power than the other simply because they can understand what's being said better than maybe someone else who's never heard some of these. So that's another piece where that isn't necessarily something that you have to use results-based accountability to ploy, that shared common language. But I think it's something that's where we learned it from. And it's been very important for us to be able to have these conversations.
I just want to highlight, someone put the Chicago Beyond Research Equity Guidebook in the chat. If you haven't already read that, I would highly suggest that you do it. This has guided so much of the work that I've done for the past, 3 or 4 years. I don't know how long it's been out, but getting this in my hand was just incredibly impactful from when I was doing work directly with youth and using them as the experts, having them be highlighted as the experts in the room, now to working with North Lawndale residents and having them be the experts in the room, and shifting up that power dynamic. So if you haven't read that, please do. It's so useful.
Thank you to everyone who participated in the chat. I know there's still a couple thoughts in there. There was a request that the three of you put your contact information if you feel like sharing. So in case people have follow-up questions and to get your sage advice on collective impact. But thank you so much for this really enlightening conversation. And it's so good to be in relationship with you all as another person in collective impact. So thanks again.
Awesome. Huge thank you to everyone on the panel. That was excellent. I learned so much and so grateful for all of your insights. Real quick, I want to just kind of do some summary of all of the wonderful things we've heard today. And again, thanks everyone for turning out on a Monday morning, and thanks even more to our panelists and presenters kind of discussing their experiences and how we can authentically tell stories that make a difference and that are in service to others. And then we'll also, more fun, have the raffle. So real quick, and this is my nerdy data side, but we're gonna do an exit survey, so please refer to the chat. When we do collective impact work and when we do community-based data collection, a big question we get is how can we increase response rate? And this is how you do it, which is collect data when everyone's kind of already here and you've already got people corralled. So if everyone could just take a brief moment or two in the chat and respond to the survey link, that'd be greatly appreciated. We created the theme this year based on feedback from last year. And as a organization that thrives in a culture of data, like we really do take your feedback in a meaningful way so that we can continue to iterate and make sure that Pi Day is helpful and beneficial for folks who are in the audience. So appreciate the time. And please take a moment as we kind of wrap up today to take that survey. Really, really appreciate that. Real quick though, I just wanted to do some quick high-level summaries of the final takeaways, and then also do our raffle. And then, like I said, we'll follow up with a recording and we'll reach out to presenters and panelists and share out contact information as well as appropriate. Moving forward. So we'll make sure to follow up here, and please feel free to reach out to us if y'all have any questions. But real quick, just wanted to kind of summarize what I thought were some of the high level takeaways from today, right? So one is that you identify the story you want to tell by the quantitative and qualitative data you collect, right? And that was, I think, a lot of Vinay's presentation today, right? Technology, databases, and evaluation support can really help streamline that storytelling. So how are you leveraging your databases, your technology to help collect the data that you want storytell around? Secondarily, and this is speaking to the Chicago Foundation for Women and Christina's wonderful presentation, promoting your story is important. Using data to promote and market your work is really, really helpful and helps to fundraise and provide dollars behind the excellent work you're doing in service of others, right? And so thinking not of data necessarily as just a storytelling mechanism for impact and learning, but also for marketing and fundraising, because we need other people to get on board with the work that we're doing, right? And then finally, this panel really highlighted that collective impact is nonlinear, right? Sometimes things don't work out, and that's okay, because it's highly relational, it's trust-based, and that over time, kind of like a complex poem, it's really important to understand that great work is always behind the collective impact work. And so it might not be apparent at first, but with patience and planning and trust and relationships, you can have a really, really excellent collective impact story to tell, right? So finally, we've got our raffle. Here are our 5 winners. We will reach out to each of you individually, and we'll be sending a pie your way. So thank you for spending Pi Day with Pi.org, and we greatly appreciate all of you. Please reach out to myself or Amber if y'all have any follow-up questions, and we'll be sure to reach out later with contact information of our panelists and presenters, and also sending out recordings for folks who couldn't be there. So thank you all so much. It is just an honor and privilege to host everyone this morning, and I wish you all a great Monday and a great rest of the week. Thank you all. Bye, everybody. Thank you all.